Today's webinar is entitled Planting the Seeds of Trust in the First 10 Seconds. Our presenter today is Bob Whipple, Trust Ambassador and CEO of Leadergrow Incorporated, an organization dedicated to development of leaders. Bob speaks on leadership topics and the development of trust in numerous venues internationally. He also teaches leadership and business classes at several universities. Bob is the author of 4 leadership books and has been named one of the top 15 consultants on leadership development by Leadership Excellent magazine and one of the top 100 thought leaders on trust by Trust Across America, Trust Around the World. A highly successful leader at a Fortune 500 company for over 30 years, Bob accomplished revolutionary change while leading a division of over 2,000 people through the application of outstanding people skills. And with that introduction, Bob, let's get started.
Thanks, Cindy. It's wonderful to be here. And this is going to be hopefully a fun hour for folks. It's an interesting challenge for me because this whole presentation is heavily slanted toward the direction of body language. And so I'm going to have to use pictures, and we'll get you involved in some polling and things like that to keep it interesting. You can't see my body language, nor can I see yours, so it makes it kind of fun to try to see how we can make this very, very helpful for you. So first of all, if you're like me, in any kind of webinar or seminar, you sit there and say, well, okay, what am I going to get out of this? Because I am devoting a little bit over an hour for this topic. It is an extremely important topic in our lives, and we don't really give it full mind share most of the time because first impressions, and you know the old saying, there's never a second chance to make a first impression. Sounds kind of trite, but it really is a very powerful statement. You can't go back and redo it. It is there, and if you do really well in a first impression, it colors and changes the entire relationship. But there's an awful lot. It's like a minefield. There's a lot of ways in which you can, kind of stump your toe, if you will, in the beginning of a relationship. So that's what this is all about, is how to do it right so you get off on the right foot and make the best progress. I don't know if any of you have caught up with the book called Blink. Malcolm Gladwell, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, wrote a book entitled Blink, where he points out that we human beings have an amazing ability to size each other up almost in a heartbeat. We don't even realize we're doing it. It's all subconscious. But when we first come face to face and glimpse another person and look at them, we make a judgment. And Malcolm talks about the first 3 seconds. I stretch it all the way out to 10 seconds, but it really doesn't matter. The point is very, very fast. We create some kind of an ether, electricity that goes between us, and we size each other up. And those first, what he calls thin slices, if you think about slicing a cucumber, if you slice a cucumber 1/4 inch thick, well, okay, you're not going to see anything through it, but if you slice a cucumber thin enough, you can actually see through it. And so we, as human beings, take lots of data and are able to assimilate it into a montage in our mind that allows us to make a judgment about that other person within a few seconds. The graph that I like to show is that, generally by the time 10 seconds has gone by, we're pretty well there with our first impression. We know our reaction to the person, even though it may be subconscious. We may not even realize it until weeks later, when all of a sudden we say, I didn't like that guy from the first time I set eyes on him, or, this person really clicked with me. So it's a fascinating topic, and I want to dive into it with first of all, a bit of a story about a time when I went to a speed networking event. This was at the Rochester Business Alliance, and I don't know if any of you have been to speed networking. It's almost like speed dating, only you don't date. It's for purposes of networking with other professionals. And at that particular event, there were 44 people in the room, and I met half of them. So 22 people I met during I think it was about 2 hours. It's pretty exhausting, actually. But you only get a chance to talk to people for about 3 minutes. They ring a gong after 3 minutes, and you index to the next person. And so it's kind of, and of course, everybody's on their best behavior. The whole idea is to try to make a strong impression on people for the purpose of potential business relationships. So it's a lot of fun, but it can be pretty daunting. Well, since I speak on body language and have done a lot of research on it for many years, I was probably paying more attention than most people to what was going on as I was meeting each person for the first time. And I have to say that in many cases, people were not that memorable. They were fumbling with their papers or looking down or doing any number of things that really weren't connecting very well with me. Of course, maybe I wasn't connecting very well with them either. It's a mutual type of thing. But I was paying attention as these people, and near the end, a lady was sitting across from me, a middle-aged lady, and we got up and we shook hands, and she moved off to the left. And so I was just making note in my own mind of, okay, who this was and the fact that we're going to try to get together later on. And all of a sudden, coming from the right-hand side, I saw a young man coming into my field of view. He blew away everybody else in the room. He was unbelievable at creating a relationship with me before we even shook hands. I mean, he's coming into my field of view, and he's sort of moving over, and I'm trying to have you think about what he might have been doing that allowed him to create that such a powerful thing. It was so powerful to me, and I've studied this stuff for years, that when we finally did shake hands, this all happens within a second, right? So when we finally did shake hands, I didn't say, it's nice to meet you. I said, congratulations, you're going to be a very wealthy man. He laughed. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, it's all about the body language. So in this case, he had a number of things which you might anticipate. One might be eye contact. As he was approaching, he made good eye contact. He wasn't fumbling with his notes. He wasn't straightening his coat. He was making good eye contact with me. He had great posture, indicating that he was an educated person and a person that took care of himself. Okay, but that wasn't the thing that separated him out from the rest of the people in the room. What separated him out was a particular look, and that look says that he really wanted to connect with me. And you've seen that look. If you've ever walked into a pet shop and seen a bunch of puppies in a ring, and there will be one puppy there that will have a certain look, and that look is, I gotcha. The look says, and if you look at that puppy, you'll see a look that says, you are the most important person to me. But right now, there's nothing else in the world to me important except you. And that young man, he didn't have a tail, and he didn't have spots or floppy ears, but he did have that look. And that look said to me that got that message across. And that's what you can do. Let me show you what it looks like in human terms. Here it is in human terms, where a young lady is shaking hands. And I had an occasion just a couple days ago to be in a networking situation where I was meeting a bunch of people, and there was a young lady, her name was Elizabeth, that looked exactly like this. When I shook her hand, I said, oh my, this is amazing. You have a special smile. And she thought I was buttering her up, and then I explained that, no, you really do have a special smile. This is called a Duchenne smile. Notice how the smile is a natural smile. It's not a fake smile. It's not put on or plastered on. And it's coming from her eyes. It starts with her eyes, and of course her mouth. And if you draw an oval around her eyes and her mouth, one oval, you'll see that her whole face is in the shape of an oval. And that becomes what's called a Duchenne smile, which is a very genuine, coming from the heart type of smile. And we'll talk a lot about the handshake part of it in a little bit later, but that's the look. And if you work hard at it, you can create that look and learn how to master it. It has to be real. If it's phony, forget about it. You'll get caught every time. But if it's real, it's extremely powerful. This is a little slide indicating the importance of body language, and probably most of you have heard about this before, so I won't dwell on it very much. It's a study done by Albert Mehrabian way back in the 60s. He studied people and tried to identify when we talk to each other face-to-face about our feelings or attitudes. This isn't about all communication. It's not about, if I'm talking to you about how to fix a carburetor, all bets are off. I mean, the words are really important. But if I'm talking with you and we're talking about our feelings or attitudes, most of the meaning that's coming through between us is coming from the body language and the tone of voice. Very little has to do with the actual words that we use. And so Mehrabian discovered this years and years ago, and we tend to forget about that. When we're meeting somebody for the first time, it feels like what we say is critical and so important and everything, and it is, but the body language is screaming out and very loudly, and we have to remember that that's happening, and you can't hide it. So let's, first of all, when we talk about body language, we need to be a little bit careful, because body language tends to be a kind of juicy subject to talk about when in a dating scene or in a bar scene or something like this. Is this a come on, or what's the signal that this person's sending, or sitting in a meeting, you know, what's this person trying to tell me with his body? And so it gets to be a little bit, we speculate a lot. In order to accurately read body language, you need to pay attention to 5 things that all begin with C. The first one is the context. What's going on around the body language, because a particular piece of body language can be very different depending on what's just happened or what's going on in the room. So you have to take that into account. The second C is clusters. If I see one particular piece of body language, maybe I'm talking with you and you're pulling on your earlobe, okay? That's a kind of body language, and it has a meaning. Actually, I'll tell you now, the meaning of that means that I'm listening and I want to hear more. It's like, almost like cupping your hand behind your ear. So if you're pulling on your earlobe and I'm speaking to you, you're giving me permission to keep speaking. Okay, so, but if that's all I'm seeing, it's one signal. And I could easily misinterpret that, or you could easily be just having an itchy ear at that point. So we need to pay attention to clusters. If there are 3 or 4 things, if you're standing in front of me and you're wringing your hands, your brow is furrowed, maybe the hair on the back of your arm is standing on end a little bit, there might be a little perspiration on your brow. Those are 4 different signals of anxiety. I've got a pretty confident situation that you're anxious because of the cluster of body language. So we like to look for clusters. The third one is congruence, and I'm going to show you a few examples of some fun things we do with congruence. But basically, it's very simple. If the body language and the words don't agree, then we give much more preference to the signal that we're getting from the body language. And we'll show that graphically in just a minute here when I get to a couple examples. The next one is consistency. Believe it or not, you have a baseline body language. When you sit in a meeting or in a classroom or anywhere, you have a particular habitual position or set of positions that are most comfortable for you. So if you, for example, let me use an example. If you are comfortable sitting with your arms crossed, arms being crossed can mean a defensive posture. And so people talk about arms being crossed being, you know, putting you off. But in fact, if that's your habitual, comfortable position, it means nothing. I shouldn't interpret it as meaning anything because that's the background of baseline behavior. So when we interpret people over a course of time, especially important in meetings, because when you're sitting around a meeting table with 8 or 10 other people, you're reading body language all the time. You know, I don't know if you saw the debates last night and watched Donald Trump throughout the thing, but his body language was just unbelievable. You could read, it was like a book in between everything that he said. And so we're reading people all the time. And the final one is culture. Culture is huge in body language, and we often forget that someone from a completely different culture is going to see things quite differently than we do, and we are not always aware of it. There's, for example, if you are an Eskimo, if I shake my head up and down, that means no. If I shake my head side to side, that means yes. That's exactly the opposite of what we think. And there are all kinds of hand gestures that mean things, and you know they're fine in English and obscene if you're in Greece. So you need to be careful. There's a wonderful book on this. I think the book is next. No, I guess the book comes later. All right, so I'm going to share a book with you that is very good for this. But let's take a look at some incongruent situations here. Here's some incongruence in two different pieces of body language. One is we're getting a smile. Great. Second one is we're getting that defensive-looking position, hunched shoulders, the crossing of the arms. And what do you end up with? You end up with a phony pasted-on smile. You have incongruence here. You're not reading a genuine smile there. You're reading a devious smile. See the next one. Here's an example of me at home. So this is not my wife, by the way. But let's say I have a fight with my wife, and she stomps off and goes to another room. And I wait a while, let her cool down, you know, I'm smart enough to be able to do it. So, but then an hour later I go in and I say, honey, are you still mad at me? And she says no, and gives me that look. Now, she said no, but her body language and her tone of voice said yes. And 100% of the time I'm going to interpret that she's still angry with me, even though she said no. That's a perfect example of how the body language and the tone of voice trumps the words every time, if there's an incongruence. I want to give you another one that you're familiar with that I think we'll have some fun with. You see advertisements. I don't know if you watch TV. Some people don't watch much TV anymore. I've gotten down to not too much anymore. But if you're listening at certain times of the day, especially around lunch hour, I usually listen when I'm eating lunch, they have these advertisements for these heavy-duty drugs that work on your system. And I don't want to name any drugs because I don't want to get in trouble. But drugs that work on your system, and they will describe. You'll recognize the scene. You'll have a person paddling a canoe or climbing a mountain or playing on the beach with a dog with a frisbee, and healthy stuff, and swimming or something like that. And they'll talk about this drug and the fact that if you've got this condition, this is the drug for you, how it helps to make you feel good and healthy and all this stuff while they're showing all these healthy pictures. And then they immediately shift gears and start going into the legalese, which they have to do, and talk about the fact that this can kill you, and this is bad for you in this way, and this way, and this way. And yet, if you take a close look, they're very clever because they don't change the picture. They're talking about very bad things that can happen to us physically, but the picture is still about throwing a frisbee on the beach with a dog and climbing a mountain and stuff like that. And so what we do is we get lulled into not really listening to the words when they talk about the negative stuff, and what we take in is the positive stuff. And then they come at the very end, they say how wonderful the drug is and don't you want to ask your doctor about it. And that's how they get away with it. So just for fun, I wanted to figure out what would it look like if one of those advertisements, when they get to talking about the side effects, what would it look like if the pictures actually did match the words that they're using? And I got a little brief video here. Now, it goes very fast, so you have to listen hard. And it is the sound is an actual sound from a advertisement, but I've buggered it up so you can't tell the name of the drug. So go ahead and run the video.
Symptoms of a serious allergic reaction may include swelling of face, lips, tongue, or throat, fainting or dizziness, very rapid heartbeat, problems readers following. Severe rash or itching. Tell your doctor if you get a lump or swelling in your neck. This effects may happen in people who take an inflammation of the pancreas, pancreatitis, which may be fatal. Pain that will not go away in your abdomen or from your abdomen to your back, with or without vomiting. Tell your doctor about all the medicines you take and if you have any medical.
So I just wished once that they would put an advertisement out that actually shows pictures that go along with the words that they're using. It would be comical. I hope you all recognize that, and maybe some of you even recognize the advertisement, but I'm not going to say what the product is. So when I talked about cultural differences, there are a lot of difference, in terms of proximity. For example, if you're working with someone, if you're from the Western world, you're working with someone from the Eastern world, they're going to be standing a lot closer to you than you're maybe used to, and your gestures are going to be different. There's a wonderful book out on this, and it's called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. It's if you happen to be in your job, you happen to be doing a lot of traveling or even dealing with people from different cultures on the phone or whatever. It's a wonderful sort of reference book. It'll put you to sleep if you're just trying to read it like a novel. But if you're going to Saudi Arabia on an airplane and you're going to be doing business over there, you take this book along with you and you read up on Saudi Arabia. There'll be 30 or 40 pages on it, and it tells you all the different customs, all the different body language, what to avoid eating, what to avoid doing when you're in that particular culture. So that is I've used that quite a bit when I travel because it's very helpful. Well, let's get back to body language. We'll talk some interesting things about body language. First one is, most of the time, you're aware of only a tiny fraction of the body language that you're sending out. It's probably 95% of body language is involuntary. You're doing it, and others can see it and pick up on it. The more they know, the more they'll pick up. But people are picking it up subconsciously, even if they haven't studied it. It's just there, and we know how to pick up on it. But you're not aware of what you're sending out most of the time. So facial expressions are the exception. We can manipulate our facial expressions, or at least try to look happy when we're not, and et cetera, or look okay when we're angry, those kinds of things. Facial expressions are a little more controllable, but there's so many of them. And the key thing with facial expressions is that when you try to force a facial expression, if I try to force that I'm not in pain, but I am, you pick up on that at a subconscious level, and you're saying to yourself, I don't know what it is, but something's wrong here. I'm not getting the true person. So you can manipulate your body language a bit, but the most important thing is to watch what's going on in your head, because what's going on between your ears is really what's coming out in hundreds of ways all over your body that you're not aware of, and that can be picked up, and that will be picked up on what they call the inaudible channel. Here's something I want to do a little poll for the group. Before we talk about this, let's get a poll up here, and I want to ask a question. Is this a good handshake for an initial meeting? Just answer yes or no, and we'll get into it here. We'll get a few answers registered. What do you think? Is this a good handshake when just meeting someone? As I'm waiting for people to check in, what's interesting about this is that when we first meet someone, the body language is 10 times more important than it normally is. We're normally taking in these signals all the time, but in those first few seconds, body language is everything, because sometimes we haven't even spoken first. That's when that young man that I met, we hadn't spoken. We hadn't shaken hands or spoken, and yet he was blowing me away with his ability to connect with me. So you either plant a seed of trust or you don't in that first second. Are we getting the things coming in? Okay. So what did the group decide here? Well, let me go on and point out another point on this, is that not being able to plant, not planting a seed in the first few seconds doesn't doom a relationship at all. You can clearly build trust with anybody over time, even if you've made a bad first impression, or not, let's say, not made a really great first impression. You can still build trust. It's a matter of consistency. It's a matter of working hard at it over a long period of time. It'll just take an awful lot longer if you haven't made a good first impression, and you'll have to work very hard because you have to overcome the negative reaction that's in the back of the mind of the person that you just met. So let's see. Most of the people said, yes, it's a good first handshake, and about a third said no. Okay. Other way around. Oh.
6 said yes, 17 said no.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I read it wrong. 6 said yes, 17 said no. Thank you, because I'm glad they went that way, because I agree with that. Some of the things that you might have picked up on here, the young man on the right has his hand in his pocket. That's not a good sign when you're meeting someone for the first time. Believe it or not, there's as much information in the non-shaking hand as there is in the shaking hand. People don't even think about what I'm doing with my non-shaking hand. But what you want to see is when someone's approaching you, you want to see the hand going up toward you, the non-shaking hand, your left hand. You want to see that coming up toward the person, not behind you or in your pocket. If you have your hand in your pocket, it's meaning you're not comfortable. There's a wonderful picture of Obama after the last election. He invited Mitt Romney to lunch, and they took a picture of the two of them, just the two of them, in the Oval Office just before lunch. And Obama's shaking Romney's hand, and he's got his other hand in his pocket. And you can just see that he's not comfortable with that particular luncheon. So you don't want to put your hand in your pocket. The other thing is, these people are not standing face to face. One of them's at 90 degrees to the other person. The smiles are both pasted on, phony smiles. You see the one on the right has to turn his head 90 degrees in order to even look at the other person. The handshake itself is a decent one, but the person on the left is quite rigid, leaning backwards. So this is a not particularly helpful first handshake, as most of you picked up on. I have a card here that will be in the slides that you get at the end of the presentation. There will be a PDF, and this will go out on the air in another week. And here are 12 points or 12 tips for the first 10 seconds. I'm not going to go over all 12 of them, but most of them I will in this session, and most of the handshake concepts. If you're interested in a card, this is actually a laminated 4x6 card that I hand out at my physical events, and I'd be glad to send you a copy if you would like. You just send me an email, and I'll send you a copy of it. My email address is there, so you can get a copy of it. The first principle is that you are showing your attitude well before you shake the other person's hand. As the other person is approaching you, you are showing. Now, this is an extreme case. Most of the time, it's not nearly this extreme. But what's really going on is your self-talk in the back of your mind. What you want to watch, let's picture yourself in a lobby of a restaurant. You're going to meet somebody for coffee, okay? And so they're coming up the walk. You are thinking to yourself, probably random thoughts. Maybe you're looking at your cell phone or whatever. And then all of a sudden, this person's coming in the doorway. What you're feeling about that meeting is going to show in every way coming out of the pores of your body that you don't even know, that you can't control. And believe it or not, other people have a remarkable ability to pick up on those signals, if not consciously, subconsciously. So the idea is this. When we're in a position where we're meeting a bunch of people or meeting an individual for the first time, we We want to make sure that our attitude is right. We want to make sure that we think about the fact that this could be a very, very important person in my life. I don't know that yet, but I really, really want to find that out. And you want to have a positive slant to meeting the person, because it could very well become that. If you have a negative slant and you're worried about getting through this in time to get back to work or something like this, then that's going to show, your anxiety is going to show, and it will color the relationship. So watch your self-talk before you actually physically meet the person. Second thing is a very interesting concept relative to body position. There's a situation here that colors the way, this is a gender-specific discussion here on body position. When men meet men, they generally will shake hands, usually square shoulder. This picture here is a little bit of an angle, so these guys have already assumed the position. But men will posture themselves, one versus the other, at an angle to each other, not square shoulder. That is, if they've shaken hands square shoulder, they will immediately posture themselves at a slight angle to each other, and there's a physiological reason for that. Men, compared to women, men have a very narrow peripheral vision. I don't know how many men are on the call here, but I hate to inform you men that your peripheral vision is that of the average groundhog. We don't notice it because we're used to it. We've dealt with it all our lives. But basically, men are focused on see the end of the tunnel and where we're going very well. We're very good at single tasking. And we see that end of the tunnel, and that's where we're headed. And so if the salt shaker is 12 inches off to the right, and we're looking in the spice cabinet, and we just can't find it, that's the reason, because we have very narrow peripheral vision, sometimes driving our spouses crazy, but that's the way we're built. And so when we posture ourselves naturally without thinking about it, this all happens naturally, and you watch yourself at a cocktail party or any reception or any time you're interfacing. If you're a man, if you're interfacing with a man, you watch and you'll see that you end up standing at an angle to the other man. And the reason is because we posture ourselves to take in as much information as we can through our ears. I like to say, and women always challenge me on this, but men listen and hear with their ears. Women don't believe that, but that's true. Men listen and hear with their ears. Women are different. Women hear with their ears, but they actually listen with their eyes. And let me tell you why. Women have much greater peripheral vision. For the average woman, the peripheral vision is between 3 and 4 feet. If they're staring straight ahead, if a woman is looking at me at 18 to 24 inches would be a comfortable distance for in a social situation, she is able to see down to my knees or even lower, maybe even down to my shoes without losing eye contact. It's creepy. Men can't understand this. So women prefer to take in, women are great multitaskers. They're able to take in much more information comfortably visually. So women listen with their eyes, and they take in that information and want to take in that information. So if you're meeting a woman for the first time, whether you're male or female, you want to shake hands, square shoulder to the person, and then you want to remain square shoulder to the person and not try to move to the side like you would with a man. Because if you move to the side, what you're going to do is you're going to start making that woman feel like she's invaded. There's a bit of an invasion going on here because you're invading her personal space, and that's going to make her nervous. So therefore, you want to stay square shoulder to the woman. Now this is all just when first meeting. afterwards, and the second time you meet or later on, all bets are off. You can do whatever feels comfortable based on the relationship. But when meeting a person for the first time, if it's a woman, stay square-shouldered, and you will do better with that person.
Hey, Bob, I'm going to interrupt you because Thomas has a question about peripheral vision. He's asking, is it always gender-specific?
Great question, Thomas. It is gender-specific, but it is two bell-shaped curves in terms of the peripheral vision. Believe it or not, engineers tend to have a little bit wider peripheral vision than non-technically trained people. But what you think of it is as two bell-shaped curves that overlap. So yes, I can find men that have great wide-angle peripheral vision, and I can probably find women who have narrow peripheral vision. But on average, there is a distinct, significant difference there, and it affects the way we stand.
Great.
So eye contact is spooky stuff. I don't know if you've ever had some extremes of one way or the other, but eye contact is interesting. The key thing here is to not have the extreme. You don't want to have an extreme where you're making almost no eye contact. I was with a CEO about a year ago, and he shook my hand, and there was no one else in the room to look at, but he still didn't look me in the, he looked off to the side. And it told me everything about the fact that that relationship wasn't going anywhere. And I got it. I got the message, and the relationship really didn't go anywhere. So that was not enough eye contact. But if you're trying too hard and making too much eye contact and never break eye contact, that's equally unnerving to people. It puts people off. You come across as staring and kind of ridiculous. So the rule is, a very good ratio is you want at least 50%. This Bill Atchison, this guy that I referred to earlier, is an expert on body language from University of Pittsburgh, and he says, if you make less than 50% eye contact, I will not trust you. So the optimal is between 60 and 70% of the eye contact for the first minute or first however time you're meeting someone. That's going to work very well. Not 100%. And so you need to look elsewhere. Where do you look? You look elsewhere on the face. You can look anywhere. I tend to look at the forehead or maybe the chin. You know, if it's a person with a huge nose, you don't want to stare at the nose, obviously. But what you don't want to do also is stare down the body. That becomes a turn-off for anyone, male or female, but particularly females are insulted if you would scan down the body. So you want to keep it to the facial area, and the most important time for eye contact is before the handshake and at the start of the handshake. That's when it's really important. And then you can look elsewhere on the face, and then at the end of the handshake, because the handshake's only a couple seconds long, you want to return eye contact because that's when the deal is really sealed. So eye contact is spooky stuff. You know, if someone is shaking your hand but looking elsewhere around the room to see who else is there, that's sending a very strong signal that you're not an important person to them. So it's pretty simple stuff, but it can get to be, I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting where somebody's sort of looking at you and you're sort of looking at them, but you don't want to appear to be staring, and so then you look away, and then you catch them again, and it gets to be a little bit of a game. It's very, very uncomfortable. So just keep it natural, and you'll do fine. Hey,
Bob, question. Do you think people don't look another person square in the eye because perhaps they're shy, they're introverted, do you think that has something to do with it, or they're just nervous? How do you train yourself if you are not doing what you should be doing?
Yeah, well, the eye is the window to the soul. I'm going to know you when I can look into your eyes and see, you know, we see so much in a person's eyes. So if you don't have the skill and you're shy and you want to look away or look down all the time, you need to work on that skill and try to make it more a natural phenomenon that you really do want to connect with that person. It just sends a very bad signal if you don't. How do you train yourself to do that? I think just practice. I think practice. And if it isn't a natural thing, you know, one of the things, just categorically, any kind of body language that isn't comfortable, that's a put on, is uncomfortable for you, is not going to work well for you. So if it's something that isn't comfortable, you have to work on it to try to get that. And you might work on that with a friend or get a coach to teach you some techniques on how to do that. Is there another question?
Yeah, Diane is asking, what about with someone you already know and you're thinking through what you're going to say and you kind of look off to the left or the right or off into space while you're contemplating that? What happens then?
No problem. Once you already know a person, then you know I'm talking today about that first impression that you're making. Once you know someone, then you're going to do what's comfortable, and the other person is too. And the good has already been done, or the damage has already been done. So just be yourself. If you find yourself constantly, kind of in a never land, looking elsewhere, that may get to be annoying for the other person, and they'll send you some signals about that. But I don't think it's nearly as important as what's going on in the very beginning. Okay, and the next thing is about what to say and what not to say. Well, you know, there's any number of things that you could say when you're first meeting somebody. Generally, you're shaking hands, and you might say, you know, it's nice to meet you, or isn't it a hot day out, or whatever it comes to you. But the big thing is authenticity. This is where authenticity shows through. If you're trying to impress someone by what you say, they're going to pick that up every time, or I'll say most of the time. So what you want to do is make sure that you're you. And whatever's coming through is coming from your heart and really from you. Because, well, I'll give you an example. When I met that young lady the other night with the Duchenne smile, I actually told her that she had a beautiful smile when I shook her hand. She did not have a problem with that or a reaction to that, a negative reaction to that, because she knew it was genuine. She knew I really meant it, okay? And she knew I was an expert in the topic anyway. So, but it's not like I was trying to butter her up. That was just how she struck me. I remember I saw what you don't want to do is say, it's a lovely tie, or I like your hair. You know, that's getting too personal, and it's put on. You don't want to be like my friend Donald Trump and say, you know, you're ugly, and then the next week say, oh, you're beautiful. You know, that doesn't work. So what you want to do is be authentic and make sure what's coming. I was at a luncheon speaking with a bunch of lawyers. It was at Christmas time, and everybody came in, and I'm meeting people like crazy all over the place, and all of a sudden there's a guy in front of me, and he's got this bright red plaid vest on. Now, he wore that for a reason. You know, that's his Christmas vest, apparently, right? So when I shook his hand, I said, wow, you guys, that's really awesome, you know, and I could do that because he was wanting that reaction. But normally I would not make a comment about anybody's attire. If perhaps, for example, I might say something, if I'm shaking someone's hand and I notice a Rotary pin, I might say something, oh, I see you're in Rotary. My father and his father were great supporters of Rotary for many years, and I hope to be some myself someday. That would be okay because that's a true event, okay? So the whole thing with all this body language stuff is don't put on an air. Don't try to be something you're not because it'll show through. On the next slide is, I don't know if any of you have run into this one before, where you want to get away from somebody. You're in a networking situation and somebody's bending your ear and you can't get away, and you know they just keep talking, and you're way past interested in what they're saying, but yet you don't want to insult them. You need to create some kind of diversion, and you know some people will say, let's get another thing of punch or something or whatever. If you haven't already exchanged business cards, that's an elegant way to create a sense of it's time to move on, but without saying it's time to move on. You just say, this has been a very interesting conversation. Can I have your business? I'd like to exchange business cards. Now, in one way, you're complimenting the person and assuming that it was an interesting conversation. You would like to follow up. But the other thing it's doing is just saying, hey, it's time for me to go meet somebody else. You don't have to say it. You've said it by exchanging business cards. And so that kind of, you're going to create some kind of diversion. Let's take another look at a handshake and do another vote here. Take a look at this. Is the first meeting. Young man is meeting a young lady, and there's a second man involved. So vote. Is this how effective is this handshake for an initial meeting? Not very effective or very effective? As you're voting here, I'll chat on. The idea here, there's a number of things going on. When we look at body language, it's not just one thing or something, but there's, in this case, there's probably 6 or 7 interesting things that are going on in this picture. The most obvious one is a two-handed handshake. You want to really avoid a two-handed handshake when you first meet someone. Two-handed handshakes have all kind of style. You can go from the way this is at the elbow. You can go the upper arm, the lower arm, just two hands on the hand. You can even put it on the shoulder. You can reach behind and grab the wallet. I mean, you know, whatever, whatever you want to do. But the idea of when first meeting someone, a two-handed handshake is way too presumptuous. It may be fine, and you know, you may have a relationship very soon with this person where a two-handed handshake is just fine, or you might want to hug, you know. But when first meeting, it's presumptuous, and it can be very dangerous because it sends mixed signals. So you want to avoid that. Extend one hand only. So we had only one person say very effective and 17 saying it's not very effective. I hope that many of you picked up on the fact that the two-handed handshake is it's called the solicitor's handshake. It's like the pastor at the back door of a church shaking people's hands as they come by and saying, we need you on the committee. You know, they grab both hands and they, I gotcha. You don't want to do that with a new person. Other things interesting, if you notice the female here has a very warm smile. You notice a slight tilt of her head, very genuine looking expression on her face. Excellent. The guy on the left is kind of off the wall, backward lean, a put on smile. The other guy's completely, I don't know what he's been smoking, but he's trying to look pleasant, trying too hard to look pleasant, and it doesn't come across very well. So it's not very much genuine in this handshake, except for the woman. I think she's done very well. We got any more questions?
Yeah, Ryan has a question. Speaking of handshakes, I recall watching a video about influencing others, in particular car salesmen, and they recommended having your hand at a slightly dominant rotation. It was said to give you dominance or command of the situation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're gonna do that. In fact, I think that's the very next slide. So let me do that. The next slide is exactly that, Ryan. What you want to do for the best effect in terms of trust, getting someone to trust you, you want to have a true vertical position with your hand when you shake the other person's hand. The approaching someone with a palm down is a typical one for, it's a power thing, and basically you are going for a dominant position over the other person. Some people think that's good. I think that's bad. If you're trying, what you want to establish is equality. You want to establish an equal relationship of trust, and then you can do other games. But so doing the palm down thing forces the other person into a palm up situation, which is, you know, the opposite of dominance, and is not a good thing to do, in my opinion. So let's look at the next one. The next one, I think we've all been there, where you reach out your hand to shake someone else's hand, and when you start shaking hands, guess what? We don't have a full grip. We've got a partial grip. I'm gripping onto the fingers of the other person, or vice versa. And it's awkward, and it's awkward for both people. You can't, at least I haven't met anybody yet that it was significantly comfortable to disengage and say, that didn't work, let's shake hands again. You know, you just don't do that. So you just put up with it, but it's not a good start to the relationship. And there's a simple solution to it that works most of the time, unless somebody's trying to subvert you, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But most of the time, for most people, when you approach them to shake hands, one of the things you're going to do is you're going to take a half step forward. It's a natural thing. We take a half step forward to step into a handshake. And then just make sure that your hand makes good, what I call web-to-web contact with the other person before you close your hand, and you will have a good, solid handshake. Let me just talk about pressure here for a second, and then I'll go back and talk about wimpy. But pressure, there is a myth that if you want to impress people, you want to give a firm handshake, and you want to, you know, and that shows that I'm powerful and I'm you know, interested in the relationship, etc. It's hogwash. The truth is, if you leave an impression where a person feels that handshake after the handshake is over, you haven't done a very good job with a handshake. Unfortunately, I did that the other night with a young lady. I shook her hand, didn't realize that she had a wrist problem. And she told me later, because we were talking about this stuff, she told me, I said, yeah, it was painful for me because you didn't know that I had a wrist problem. Well, how could I know that she had a wrist problem? Because there was no indication of it. So you have to be really, really sensitive and really careful about it. But you want to make sure there's good web-to-web contact before you close your hand, and most of the time it'll be all right. Use a moderate pressure. Don't try to impress the other person with how hard you can squeeze. But also avoid the limp fish handshake. And the limp fish is generally a result of not good web-to-web contact. Basically what happens, and there are some people who are built this way. I know a provost of a college where I live that actually will shake your hand, reach to shake your hand, and then as you're starting to close your hand, he'll pull his back, and you get his fingers. He does that as a power play. He's doing that as a conscious thing, and I caught him on it one time, and he was embarrassed and agreed. But so you run into people that have, some people don't want to shake hands because they have arthritis, or they're worried about disease, or they may have a prosthesis. There's a number of reasons why people wouldn't want to shake hands. Sometimes they'll give you a fist bump. You have to go with the flow, whatever happens there. But one elegant way, if someone is, what you're looking for, you're in a social setting and you're extending your hand and taking a half step forward, you're kind of committing yourself in your body language going forward, and you're expecting to see a mirror image. You're expecting to see the hand being extended to you and the other person stepping forward. If you don't get that, this all happens in a quarter of a second. This happens so fast, but if you don't get that, you're out there. It's a very awkward thing, and all you do is just turn your palm up. Just say, it's nice to meet you, and you get out of that awkward situation, because that other person isn't going to shake your hand, and they don't want to shake your hand, but they don't want to say anything. So just turn your palm up and say, it's nice to meet you, and it's a very natural, friendly gesture, and you're out of the awkwardness. So I think that, do we have any more questions coming in?
We have one more, Bob, and we have 3 minutes.
Okay.
So Thomas wants to know, are the dynamics different depending on the number of people present?
Great question. In general, it is a individual-to-individual situation. However, with a number of people standing around, let's say there's 3 people in a group, and you're able to join the group. One thing is you want to be very careful about walking up to a group that's in conversation and entering the group, because that's a no-no. You're interrupting perhaps an important conversation, or at least socially it's not the best thing to do. But if somehow or other all of a sudden there's 4 people standing there and introducing themselves and you're one of them, it's each person establishing a relationship in 3 seconds with each other person. Think of it as individual, and yet in the group setting that's going on, you have diversions, you have other people talking or moving or looking or whatever. There may be business cards being exchanged. Okay, so you have to take the whole thing into account and just go with the flow of whatever's happening. Don't be rigid about it. But make sure as you do connect with each person, you give each person the same attention you would if there's nobody else there. That's the trick. Bill Clinton was particularly strong at this. He would go down a line of people and shake, hundreds and hundreds of hands, but each person felt an individual connection with him because he made that happen. He made sure they knew that he was looking at them and glad to meet them. And that's what you want to do, regardless of how many people you're shaking hands with. So here's my contact information if this is helpful to you in any way. I do a lot longer presentations. This has been a very short 1-hour session on it, but it's fascinating. And of course, when we do it live, we're doing acting out things, so it's a little more fun than we could do in a webinar. But I hope this has been helpful to you. These tools can change your life. They will change your life because if you can start your relationships out on a very solid footing, those relationships will progress toward trust at 20 times the rate that they normally would. And that is a huge advantage in any setting, whether it's business or social. You want to get to trusted relationships with people as quickly as possible, and the way to do it is to set with a good first impression. So I hope you had fun, and that's the webinar for today.
Bob, thank you so much. And to all of you alums out there, it is 1 o'clock Eastern, and unfortunately our time with you is up. Marwan, I know you sent a question. I'm going to make sure Bob gets that, and we will email you a response. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Any other questions can be emailed to ritalum@rit.edu.